Thank you. Thank you very much for this very nice introduction. It's a pleasure to be here virtually, at least, and talk about GreenComp, the European Union's sustainability competence framework that I indeed was very much involved in developing. I'm going to talk a little bit about the background and the context of the framework, why we thought it's a good idea to develop such a framework in the first place. And then also the framework came out in January 2022. What we have learned since then in terms of how sustainability competences are already put in practice in teaching and learning or not. So if we go to the next slide, just to talk a little bit about the context. We live in a world, in a society where fortunately the majority of people is very much aware that climate change, environmental challenges, sustainability challenges are a serious problem. The 77% of EU citizens that consider climate change a serious problem, that comes from a Eurobarometer survey from 2023, where people thought that on a scale of 1 to 10, the severity of climate change for most respondents was between 7 and 10. And even 7 countries considered it even the world's most important problem, including Germany, Belgium, Denmark, Ireland, and a few others. Now, looking at that beyond the EU globally, of course, I think we are all very much aware that this is also something that concerns very much young people in particular. The Fridays for Future movement was something that was initiated, of course, by young people, by school students even. And at the same time, this awareness often creates among young people even eco-anxiety and very negative feelings. And part of that is also to find, or in the responses that we have from young people, is that they consider that so far, at least, education, be that school education, be that higher education or other educational paths, fails to prepare them adequately to tackle climate change and other sustainability challenges. Again, we know from a Eurobarometer survey from 2019 that then 41% of young people in the EU believe that such issues were not addressed sufficiently at school, were not taught sufficiently at school. Another Eurobarometer from 5 years later, so from 2024, this was reduced, so that's a good sign. It was 28% who thought so, but also from, again, looking beyond the EU, from studies like the International Civic and Citizenship Education Study, where 8th graders are asked, 42 of them reported, or so less than half actually reported, 42% reported that they learned a lot about environmental protection, but these numbers were in some countries rather lower, like in the Netherlands, only 27%, or France, 29%. So against this background, a rather big awareness, but somehow the problems and the challenge turning that awareness in action, we thought that this calls for some support to achieve the deep and transformative and systemic changes that are necessary to turn this awareness into action. And before I come to speak about the framework itself, which is in a way the support that we thought might be necessary, let's go to the next slide, and to also just zoom out a little bit, talking about green competences or green skills, because this is something that you might hear interchangeably, especially in the English-speaking world. Skills and competences, green skills and competences are often used interchangeably, so that doesn't really help when applying the concepts. We use green competences in a sort of broad sense as a combination of knowledge, skills, and attitudes. So that means knowledge would be facts, figures, concepts, ideas, theories, and so on that help us to understand the world, certain areas, certain subjects. Skills are usually defined as the ability to apply this, let's say, more theoretical knowledge, and attitudes, disposition or mindset to react to ideas, persons, situations. When we in the EU talk about green skills, we usually mean, and again, there is no hard definition of that, or no entirely commonly agreed definition, but we usually mean more professional technical skills that would be related to so-called green jobs. So something that is clearly labor market oriented and related to specific job profiles. And on the next slide, and I promise I will come to GreenComp itself after that one, but just to give you also a little bit the context that GreenComp is a competence framework, but it's not the only one that the Commission has developed. So there are several competences, starting out with a competence framework on digital competences, which you can see has even been revised and renewed already a couple of times since it was first published in 2013. There is, and then also there is a whole sort of palette of tools like self-assessment tools or frameworks that are more for organizations, that are more for teachers. All of this have sort of been spin-offs of that one framework. And then there are other competences, all based on the concept of the 8 key competences for lifelong learning, and there are other key or competence frameworks that have been developed based on this competence for lifelong learning, like the AntroComp, which is for entrepreneurial competences, LifeComp, which is about personal social learning to learn competences, and then the last one in this series, the GreenComp, which was published in 2022. And now on the next slide, we come to GreenComp finally, which is the European Sustainability Competence Framework, and which describes a set of sustainability competences, which I will talk about in a minute, what we mean by that, which with the aim to help learners think, plan, and act with empathy, responsibility, and care for the planet. The framework was developed more or less over the course of 2021. It has a really strong scientific underpinning and was developed with experts and stakeholders in sustainability education and sustainability more generally. And on the next slide, we can see a little bit the timeline that led to the development. So already in the end of 2020, we had literature review, scientific studies, and then this developed into a first draft and so on, which was then refined with experts in meetings, refined and revised until the publication in January of 2022. On the next slide, we see the 4 big competence area that the framework covers. So this is about sustainability values, about complexity and sustainability, imagining and visioning sustainable futures, and also coming back to the first slide, that we are often missing sort of the agency, the action part. So this is one competence area, acting for sustainability. On the next slide, we can see those 4 competence areas again in the top row. And each competence area consists of 3 defined competences. And what you can see here, I think, in this overview is what we tried to achieve is to really take an holistic approach to sustainability, so to cover the economic, environmental, social, cultural dimension of sustainability. And also important to note is that these competences, they are all interrelated, but they are not sequential. So we don't have to master first the column on the left side before we can move on, but rather it's an interrelation. Talking a little bit more in detail, perhaps about the first area, so about sustainability values. What we do not mean here is that this is about, we can still go back. I'll come to that slide in a second. No, back. So I'm just gonna go on talking about the sustainability values. So what we do not mean here is that this is about imposing certain kind of fixed values, but it's rather for the learner to be encouraged and to learn how to reflect on own personal values, how perhaps also challenge those values and worldviews, and especially with relation to sustainability or unsustainability. So this area also advocates equity and justice for current and for future generations, and very much also promotes the idea that humans are part of nature. So not above it, not separate, apart from it, but an integral part of it. And now we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So what we have done, and this refers to what I mentioned, what we have learned since we published GreenComp, is that we have looked at state or so-called core curricula that could be curricula at national level in some countries with centralized education systems, or curricula at regional level. But in any case, in a way, core curricula that would define what students should learn at school. And we have taken GreenComp and looked at the competences, not all 12 of them, but 9, but definitely out of each competence area, and also in some cases sort of combining 2 competences into one to sort of make more sense for the curriculum. So in terms of values, what we can see that across Europe, we can see that some elements of the value discussion are included in most curricula, like valuing diversity, preserving local culture, and so on. When we focus more on sustainability and values in relation to sustainability, then this is in much fewer curriculas across Europe. And also, and these next 2 bullet points, they refer to a study by UNESCO, which also came out this year, where UNESCO also looked at curricula in so secondary school curricula, and looked especially how climate change and sustainability is treated in science and social science subjects across the world, really. And their finding is that there is rather a focus very much still on cognitive learning, which of course we need and which is good, but it's a rather singular focus, and there's not so much social and emotional or action-oriented learning about the environment, about sustainability and climate change. And when we come to even more specific issues like indigenous knowledge or justice-related issues, then this is really, really hard to find. Now, coming back to GreenComp on the next slide, and talking about the area of embracing complexity and sustainability, so this area is about empowering learners with systemic thinking, with critical thinking, with reflections on how to better assess information and also challenge unsustainability, and also especially when it comes to systems thinking, to identify interconnections, things like feedback loops, and problem framing, that is to frame challenges as sustainability problems to better grasp the scale of a situation and to identify also the main actors that are involved there. And also the problem framing, actually, that might be an interesting bit to know, is that in one of the first versions, it was rather problem solving, but then our sustainability experts thought that this is already means a sort of too one-dimensional way of thinking. So problem and solution and one solution, which might be at odds with the kind of systems thinking and the other areas like the exploratory thinking, which is in the next area, to be open for different solutions and also perhaps to have to adapt to different situations. If we look at the curricula again on the next slide, what we can see is that in many European education systems, we find examples of how humans interact across space and across time. Also about the interdependence between ecological, economical, social, and cultural aspects. Most of the times it's it's the relation between two of those aspects, or rather not all four of them actually. But what we can't find at all is examples of systems thinking as such, so of concrete concepts of complex systems and of some of the terms I've already mentioned, like feedback loops, synthesis, emergence. So this is something that is very much linked to systems thinking, but we don't find any of such examples in any of the curricula. So, I mean, this could be that perhaps this is too detailed to be present in core curricula, or also it is not present in curricula. So and therefore also that not in teaching at schools. But this is something where we would need more research. Another finding, and this is from the study that is cited there below, is that what still often happens in school practice is that, and here especially if we talk about climate change and the challenges related to climate change, is that solutions that are presented or content that is covered often has to do with, for example, reducing waste. So you could say it's kind of an under-complex treatment of the issue, which is, so if you go at primary school level, this is of course very hands-on. It's great having waste collections, really making children understand sort of really the hands-on impact. But if that sort of continues to be the answer to the really complex sustainability problems that there are and that secondary students are also increasingly aware of, then this can pose a problem. And on the next slide, I have an example of, because often also when I talk to teachers, then I'm also confronted with the sort of reaction that, yes, but systems thinking, this is so difficult, we would never be able to teach it. So it's really something way too complex to be taught at school level. And I like this example very much, which is where you can see the tea, cup of tea in the lower right corner of this illustration. And I think this is something that almost everybody can relate to. Even if you don't drink tea, you still might, or you know somebody who does. In any case, most people know about it. And you could use another example, of course. But this shows very nice the different sort of areas, the different connections that could be thought about, that come into play here. And it's not even everything that is mentioned on this illustration. So where is the tea produced? Is it produced under fair circumstances? What is the environmental impact of shipping it? from India perhaps to Europe, things like that. But it's a simple example where you can already do a lot with, and already also do a lot with even small children, of course. I mean, adapting it to the level of understanding. And on the right side, what I've put there are issues or are points that would support this kind of teaching and learning and school. So actually, and at school level, we would probably rather talk about cross-curricular teaching and learning. So the transdisciplinary and the joint program refers rather to higher education, but I think you get the idea. So cross-curricular, cross-subject teaching, project-based, problem-based learning, of course. And what I often get as a feedback why this is not happening is that there are rather still rigid structures in formal education, so a lack of space and time to actually apply such project-based or problem-based learning. Subject and discipline focus that is often hard to get over. And also educators who might be very willing and very enthusiastic about teaching this, but at the same time lacking sort of the confidence or the capacity, which of course means lacking the training or the opportunities to for professional development to actually then achieve this capacity that would be needed. On the next slide, we have our third competence area about sustainable futures. And this is very much so that learners can visualize, can imagine alternative future scenarios that are sustainable, and also to identify the steps that are needed. So in a way, working backward from the scenario that you visualize, that is your sustainable future scenario, and identify the steps that would be needed to get there. It also means having perhaps to cope with uncertainty, perhaps with trade-offs. So this is the part about the adaptability. And also very much exploratory thinking, so applying creative and, again, cross-curricular transdisciplinary approaches to our way of thinking. And also here on the next slide, the look into the curricula, and there it's very clear that this is the competence that is least present in European school curricula. And it's both surprising and not. So surprising because schools are actually very well placed to practice futures thinking, because young people, in a way, they are naturally future oriented. So much of their thinking is centered on future events. What am I going to do tomorrow? But in future developments, what do I want to be? So that things that matter to them personally, but also, of course, in a bigger way. But it's very much the thinking sort of naturally is very much futures oriented. Now, education is, however, often centered around past events and established facts. And don't get me wrong, this is, of course, very, very important. And evidently, it's crucial to build our actions on established facts, to act responsibly in the present and draw also conclusions for the future. But if it stops there, and if we don't actively embed futures thinking into teaching and learning, then we also sort of deny our young people a chance to engage in this future scenario thinking. And I have put here a couple of terms of this competence from GreenComp on the slide. So you can see them: creativity, experimentation, uncertainty, ambiguity, risk. So these might also hint why perhaps it is more difficult, or some educators find it more difficult to engage with sort of a learning path where the outcome is not quite sure, where you have to sort of accept a certain openness of the learning outcome and of the result. And but perhaps we can also discuss that later, what your experience is there. On the next slide, this is just to give you a little bit of a tool to look at. It's something that we developed at the European Commission's Joint Research Center together with TED-Ed, which is sort of the educational branch of TEDx. So these are online lessons on futures thinking. So they are really a good entry point into what futures thinking means. And they provide a clarity on concepts such as perception of time, futures, what is a futures mindset, what are multiple futures, and also on taking actions or action. And this brings me to the next slide and to the last competence area on acting for sustainability, where again we have 3 competences. So I think they are pretty much self-explanatory. Perhaps what makes GreenComp different from also other frameworks that exist is also a focus here on political agency. So even though the framework is in a way, if you want, very much also something for the individual and for the individual learner to acquire competences, it's also important that we tap into the collective part and into the part where we assign and where we find political responsibility. So that means a learner should be able to navigate the political system, to be able to identify which actors should be addressed to achieve sustainability. And acting, collective action is clear, acting in collaboration with others. And individual initiative is, of course, about acting as a person as an individual, but it means, first of all, also to know one's potential, because obviously everybody is very different and we all have different strengths. So to be able to identify them and then to use them to achieve results for sustainability, this is what this competence is about. And now for the last time on the next slide, the look into the curricula across Europe. So what we see there is we see quite a majority of examples on individual action and responsibility, and less so on collective action, and even less so on political agency. So, and this is also a finding from the UNESCO study that I mentioned earlier, that there's more of a tendency to emphasize individual action actually in the private sphere. And also perhaps this is understandable. I mean, often teachers are held to be politically neutral. So as soon as you sort of go into the collective sphere and the collective action, this is perhaps something that some educators don't feel comfortable with, or might not even be allowed to go there. So, but it's interesting that it's also actually really written in the curricula like that. Now the problem again, and I mentioned this already at the very beginning, is, and here is the evidence from PISA, just to underline that again, we are very much aware, or it's clear that young students are quite aware of what is happening, of the severity of climate change. They have a lot of knowledge about that, but they don't believe, they don't, not as many as are aware, believe that they can actually do something about the global problems like climate change. And this is something that we want to change. And on the next slide, there are just a couple of examples of other initiatives that we have done in relation to GreenComp. So also in 2022, we established this community of like-minded people and organizations that want to engage on climate and sustainability education issues. It's called Education for Climate Coalition, and if you want to check it out or even join it, there is the code. And on this community, or as part of this community, and we can go to the next slide, we have actually created a community of practice directly for GreenComp. So this is a forum where people and organizations that use the framework or that work on sustainability competences more generally can connect, and there's a resource library and yes, different activities that you can find out about. And then just to mention on the next slide that GreenComp has been translated in all EU languages, so it can be used in your context, in your own language. And on my last slide, I have put down a couple of inspiring examples, which is a case study where we have looked how GreenComp has been adapted into different contexts, different education levels already, because the framework is a conceptual model. It's rather sort of general, and if it has to be adapted to different needs by education stakeholders. And also on two so-called Erasmus Plus teacher academies, which are a flagship of the Erasmus Plus program, where teacher education institutions get together, so from different countries get together on sort of different focus areas, and some of them focus on sustainability education and actually use GreenComp, the framework. So these are two examples, Edusta and TAPTS. And they use, so they produce learning packages for teachers based on GreenComp, different material, digital open badges, and for short online courses that teachers can take. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for this nice presentation. I think we got a quite good overview of the